Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
The ancient tomb ship's hull groaned like a dying beast as Riker crawled deeper into its ruptured belly. 3 days he had breathed toxic fumes that burned his lungs. 3 days of hands bleeding from prying apart twisted metal. 3 days of his radiation counter-ticking steadily upward, warning him that death was accumulating in his cells with each passing hour. All for a faint signal that called to him through walls of debris. When his fingers finally touched the cold hilt, buried beneath the skeletal remains of what might have been the ship's captain, Riker felt not triumph, but a strange resonance. The sword seemed to pulse against his palm, a heartbeat answering his own. Then came the vision, sudden and violent. A face contorted in agony, encased in an ornate helmet. Blue eyes just like the woman's he would meet later, wide with betrayal. A symbol etched in blood, the same mark he would see on the mercenary's armor. The vision lasted only seconds but left him gasping, disoriented. "What the hell?" he muttered, blinking away the afterimages. Must be the toxic fumes, or radiation sickness setting in. But as he wrapped the blade in protective cloth, his hands trembled in a way that had nothing to do with exhaustion. The stench of oxidized metal and cheap synthetic alcohol hung in the recycled air of Kazan's junk shop. Riker's boots left dark imprints in the dust as he approached the counter, his prize wrapped in tattered cloth. His shoulders ached from 3 days of digging through the compressed wreckage of the ancient tomb ship. 3 days of breathing toxic fumes, avoiding automated defense systems that still functioned after centuries of dormancy, and sleeping in 2-hour shifts to avoid the scavenger gangs that prowled the debris field. All for this blade. "This hunk of scrap isn't worth 10 credits, rasped Kazan, his 6 arms moving in constant, unsettling patterns as 4 of his crimson eyes examined the sword, while the other 2 remained fixed on Riker. The junk dealer's scaly skin glistened under the flickering lights of his cramped shop. Kazan's upper arm suddenly froze mid-gesture. He leaned closer, his nostrils flaring as he studied the faint markings along the blade's edge. His lower set of eyes widened in recognition. "Take it back," he whispered, pushing the weapon away. "Take it back where you found it." Riker didn't flinch. He'd faced down worse than a 6-armed fence with questionable ethics. He'd survived the Outer Rim Wars, navigated the treacherous politics of a dozen space stations, and managed to keep breathing in a universe that seemed determined to reclaim the oxygen he'd borrowed. "It's worth more, and you know it," Riker replied, his voice steady. His hand casually rested on the hilt, feeling the strange warmth that seemed to pulse from the metal despite its dull appearance. There was something about this weapon, something that had called to him from beneath tons of twisted alloy and broken dreams. Take it for free," Kazan suddenly hissed, backing away. "That blade is cursed. It should never have been disturbed." His voice dropped to a terrified whisper. "I've seen what clan blades do to their owners. They don't just mark you as property, they drink your soul. Each kill strengthens the blade and weakens the wielder. It's unnatural." The junk dealer's eyes darted nervously to the shadows of his shop. "The runes? They're clan markings. Do you know what happens to thieves who steal clan relics?" The shadow appeared so suddenly that even Riker's combat-honed instincts barely registered the movement. One moment, empty space behind him. The next, a presence that seemed to drop the temperature in the room by several degrees. She materialized like a nightmare, tall and lithe, with skin so deeply blue it absorbed light rather than reflected it. Her hair flowed like liquid mercury, catching the shop's dim illumination and transforming it into cold fire. But it was her eyes that froze Riker's blood. Glacial blue, ancient, merciless. The warrior woman ignored Riker completely, moving with predatory grace around him. Before Kazan could react, she had a blade pressed against one of his 4 throats. It was impossibly thin, almost translucent, yet Riker knew instinctively it could slice through the junk dealer's leathery hide without resistance. "Sarvotka Katar, Neveth Kamur," she intoned, her voice carrying the brittle crack of ice sheets breaking in winter. Kazan's reaction was immediate and visceral. His skin paled to a sickly yellow, and a tremor ran through all 6 of his arms. He seemed to shrink before Riker's eyes, recognizing not just a threat, but some ancient promise of retribution. "It's worth a life," she continued in standard language, the blade never wavering from Kazan's throat. Whoever holds my father's blade is his debtor. Kazan went utterly still, all 6 arms frozen mid-gesture. Terror radiated from him in almost visible waves. The warrior slowly turned her head toward Riker, moving with such fluid precision it seemed inhuman. Her gaze impaled him like a physical force. And his debtor is my property. Each word fell like a stone into still water. By the law of the Qatar clan, human, you now belong to me. Riker's fingers tightened around the sword's hilt. The metal seemed to pulse against his palm, almost like a warning. He looked from her merciless eyes to the blade at the junk dealer's throat and understood with sickening clarity that this relic he'd excavated had just excavated a grave for his freedom. I belong to no one, he growled, the muscles in his jaw tightening. Her lips curved into something too cold to be called a smile. The law disagrees. A tiny red light blinked to life beneath the counter. Kazan had triggered a silent alarm. Through the grimy window of the shop, Riker could see distant movement in the filthy alleys of Tartar Station. The synchronized march of armored figures. Heavy bootsteps echoed through the maze of corridors outside, growing louder with each second. They were coming for the sword, and for its new owner. Fool! Kaya hissed, shoving Riker away from the door with surprising strength. Her silver hair whipped around her face like metallic snakes. You led them here! Riker scrambled behind a pile of scrap metal, his combat instincts kicking in as he assessed potential weapons in the cluttered shop. I just dug up the sword, he snapped back, checking the power level on his blaster. Nearly depleted, just his luck. How was I supposed to know it came with a fanatical owner? The armored door shuddered under a heavy impact. Dust sifted from the ceiling. Kaya's eyes flashed with cold fury. You will obey me, slave, she commanded, her voice allowing no possibility of refusal. Do what I say, and perhaps you'll live to see morning. Riker's face hardened. He'd been a soldier, a mercenary, a scavenger, but never someone's property. I'm not your slave or your dog, he replied, quickly scanning the shop's cramped interior. Years of surviving in hostile environments had taught him to identify escape routes in seconds. Want to survive? Then listen to me. We'll block the entrance with that plasma converter. He nodded toward a massive piece of machinery. The ventilation shaft above us is the only way out. Kaya froze, her expression a mixture of shock and outrage. Riker could almost see the thoughts racing behind those ice-blue eyes. In her world, someone like him, a claimed debtor, would bow their head and follow orders without question. But here he was, issuing commands as if they were equals. The door buckled under another thunderous blow. Metal screeched against metal. Fine, human, she reluctantly agreed, her voice tight with displeasure. But when this is over, our conversation about your status will resume. They moved in silent, efficient tandem, his pragmatic strength complementing her fluid grace. Together they dragged the heavy converter in front of the door, reinforcing it with scrap metal and welding tools. They finished barricading the entrance mere seconds before it was blown inward with explosive force. The blast knocked them backward. Through the smoke and debris, 3 figures emerged, mercenaries in black armor adorned with silver veins that pulsed with energy. The symbol of the Veil clan gleamed on their chest plates. Blaster fire erupted, filling the cluttered shop with deadly light. Riker and Kaya moved instinctively into a back-to-back fighting stance. He fought with brutal efficiency, using the environment to his advantage, hurling objects to disrupt their aim, creating improvised traps from the shop's inventory. Left flank, weaker armor joint, Riker called out, noting the vulnerability in one mercenary's protection. Without hesitation, Kaya pivoted and struck, her blade finding the exact spot he'd identified. The mercenary dropped with a strangled cry. She wielded her twin blades in a hypnotic dance of death, the weapons becoming blurs of light as they severed circuitry and sliced through armor joints. Her fighting style was elegant and precise, generations of martial tradition in every movement. His was adaptable and unpredictable, forged in 100 desperate battles where survival was the only victory. A mercenary charged toward them, energy shield activated. Riker scooped up a handful of metallic dust from a nearby container and flung it into the attacker's face. The particles bypassed the shield, temporarily blinding the mercenary. Riker took him down with a swift, brutal strike. That was dishonorable, Kaya hissed, even as she parried a blow from another attacker. It was effective, Riker shot back, diving for cover as blaster fire tore through the space he'd occupied a moment before. Your honor won't matter if you're dead. She leapt atop a counter, spinning in a graceful arc that brought her blades down on a mercenary's exposed neck. We face our enemies as warriors, she declared, not vermin scurrying in shadows. Riker responded by shorting out a power coupling, plunging part of the shop into darkness. Great. You be the warrior, he muttered, taking advantage of the confusion to flank two mercenaries. I'll just focus on staying alive. Together, they were devastating despite, or perhaps because of, their contrasting methods. They were perfectly synchronized, anticipating each other's movements as if they'd trained together for years. And they both silently hated how right it felt. Having repelled the initial assault, they found themselves pinned behind the main counter as the mercenaries regrouped near the damaged entrance. They have scanners, Kaya whispered, her breath warm against Riker's ear. They know exactly where we are. Excellent, Riker replied with a grim smile that didn't reach his eyes. The metallic rasp of an amplified voice broke the momentary silence. Human, called the leader of the Veil mercenaries, his helmet distorting his words into something barely recognizable. We know you're not from the clan. The girl and the blade mean nothing to you. Give her to us and we will not only spare your life, but also pay 100,000 credits. He paused, then added with vicious precision, think about it, scavenger. Honor for a clan that abandoned her? Her own uncle sold us her location. He'll be delighted when we bring him her head. Why die for someone whose own blood betrayed her? Kaya's body tensed beside him. Riker could feel her eyes boring into him, searching his face for his decision. She saw his hesitation, the quick calculations running behind his eyes. She knew his kind, mercenary, scavenger, a man without clan or honor. Betrayal was the logical choice. It was what she expected. 100,000 credits. The number echoed in Riker's mind, a tantalizing promise of everything he'd ever wanted. Enough to buy his own ship, not some patched-together salvage job, but a real vessel capable of interstellar travel. Enough to leave this sector behind, to start fresh somewhere beyond the reach of the clans and their ancient blood feuds. Enough, perhaps, for a life worth living. He looked at Kaya. In the dim emergency lighting, her midnight blue skin seemed to absorb the shadows themselves. She stared back at him with cold contempt, her posture already rigid with the certainty of his betrayal. In her world, honor was everything. In his, survival. Your decision, human. The Veil leader's voice crackled through the smoke-filled air. Your life or hers. The ground suddenly shook as a second explosion ripped through the shop's rear wall. Two more mercenaries entered through the breach, their weapons already firing. The situation had just gone from bad to impossible. Riker slowly rose to his feet, keeping his hands visible. His muscles protested after the fight, bruises already forming beneath his tattered clothing. Good offer, he said, pitching his voice loud enough to carry to the mercenaries. Kaya's face turned to stone, but Riker caught the almost imperceptible flicker of something else in her eyes. Not surprise, but confirmation, as if she'd known all along that humans couldn't be trusted. But there's one problem, Riker continued, his gaze falling on the ancient sword lying on the counter between them. The dull metal seemed to drink in the scarce light, somehow looking darker than the shadows surrounding it. He reached for it with deliberate slowness, feeling its strange weight as his fingers closed around the hilt. The inscription on it says, "All enemies of the fallen warrior," he said, turning to face the mercenaries. The blade felt alive in his hand, a dangerous extension of his arm. Seems like that makes you my problem too. Before anyone could react, Riker's free hand whipped forward, hurling a heavy plasma battery he'd secretly disconnected during their barricade building. It struck the power shield generator the mercenaries had set up at the entrance with devastating accuracy. The explosion was blinding, a searing flash that temporarily turned the world white. In the darkness and chaos that followed, Riker acted not with the principled calculation of an honor-bound warrior, but with the ruthless pragmatism of a survivor. He didn't engage them in combat. He didn't waste time with posturing or declarations. He set the shop on fire. The blaze spread with terrifying speed, feeding on chemical compounds and volatile materials that filled the junk shop. Into the shaft now, he shouted to the stunned Kaya, grabbing her wrist and pulling her toward the ventilation opening they'd identified earlier. Acrid smoke billowed through the shop as flames climbed the walls with hungry intensity. The mercenaries, blinded by the explosion and disoriented by the rapidly deteriorating conditions, began to panic. Their organized assault dissolved into confusion and desperate shouts. Riker boosted Kaya into the narrow ventilation shaft, then pulled himself up after her. The metal was hot against his palms as they crawled upward, leaving behind the roar of the flames and the increasingly distant screams. Smoke pursued them through the shaft, stinging their eyes and burning their lungs, but they pushed onward, driven by the primal need to escape. The ventilation system of Tartar Station was a labyrinthine network of narrow passages, designed not for human traversal, but for the efficient circulation of recycled air. Darkness enveloped them as they crawled forward, the heat from the fire below gradually receding. The only sounds were their labored breathing and the distant wail of emergency sirens. "We need to keep moving," Riker whispered, his voice hoarse from the smoke. "They'll have thermal scanners. If we stop—" A deafening crack interrupted him as the section of duct beneath Kaya suddenly gave way. The weakened metal, compromised by the heat and their weight, sheared clean away. She fell with a startled cry, disappearing into darkness. "Kaya!" Riker hissed, scrambling forward. He peered through the jagged hole to see her crumpled form on a maintenance walkway about 10 feet below. She was attempting to stand, her face contorted in pain. Without hesitation, he lowered himself through the opening and dropped down beside her. She had managed to get to her knees, but her right leg was bent at an unnatural angle. A shaft of emergency lighting from a distant conduit illuminated her face. Pale blue now, drained of color. "I don't need your help," she snarled through clenched teeth, but the effect was undermined by the tremor in her voice. Her hand clutched at her thigh, where a piece of metal had torn through her armor and embedded itself in the flesh. Riker glanced up at the ventilation shaft, then down the maintenance corridor that stretched into darkness in both directions. The sound of heavy footsteps and electronic chatter echoed from somewhere not far enough away. "Then don't consider it help," he replied, kneeling beside her. "Consider it an investment in my own survival." With practiced efficiency, he examined her injury. The metal shard had penetrated deep, and blood, darker than human blood, almost black in the dim light, seeped around the edges. He knew better than to remove it. That would only accelerate the bleeding. "Can you walk?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. She tried to stand again, pride overwhelming common sense, but collapsed almost immediately. A hiss of pain escaped through her tightly controlled expression. "Hold on to me," Riker growled, scooping her up in his arms. Her body tensed from pain and indignation. "I'll get us out of here." She wanted to protest. He could see it in the rigid set of her jaw, but necessity overruled pride. Her arms reluctantly encircled his neck, her silver hair falling across his chest as he began to move down the corridor. "Left," she murmured after they'd traveled some distance in silence. "There's an old storage bay. We can regroup." Riker followed her directions, hyper-aware of her weight in his arms and the warmth of her body against his. The storage bay turned out to be a small, forgotten compartment filled with outdated equipment and supply crates. The door, long since removed from station security protocols, closed behind them with a reassuring thud. He set her down gently on a crate, then quickly checked the perimeter, locating the only other exit, an emergency hatch that presumably led to another maintenance corridor. Satisfied they weren't immediately trapped, he returned to Kaya and knelt before her. "This is going to hurt," he said simply, producing a small medkit from one of his many hidden pockets. She met his gaze, her eyes like frozen lakes. "I'm familiar with pain." Working in silence, Riker cleaned around the wound, applied a coagulant to slow the bleeding, and carefully stabilized the metal shard to prevent further damage. His hands moved with the practiced precision of someone who had treated battlefield injuries before, perhaps too many times. As he worked, his fingers brushed against another scar on her thigh. An old, deliberate wound, clearly made by a blade. His eyes flickered to it briefly, then continued his work without comment. "My uncle," she said, noticing his glance, "during a training exercise when I was 16, he always believed a woman couldn't lead the clan." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but Riker could hear the buried rage beneath the words. "He taught me that enemies don't always announce themselves with drawn weapons." "Why did you come back for me?" Kaya asked suddenly, breaking the tense silence. "In the shaft. You could have kept going." Riker continued working, not meeting her eyes. "Like I said, investment in my survival. You know this station. I don't." Liar! He looked up then, surprised by the accusation. Her face had softened slightly, the imperious mask slipping to reveal something more complex beneath. You've survived this long by reading people, assessing threats, exploiting weaknesses, she continued. You didn't need my knowledge to escape. You would have found a way. Riker finished bandaging her leg before responding. Maybe I just don't like debts. You saved me from those mercenaries. We saved each other, she corrected, and now you've saved me again. The scales are unbalanced. A distant explosion rumbled through the station, causing dust to drift down from the ceiling. The hunt for them continued. Why is this sword so important? Riker asked, changing the subject. His hand unconsciously went to the blade, now secured at his hip. Important enough for the Vale clan to send kill teams after it? Kaya was silent for so long that he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, softer, stripped of its commanding edge. It was my father's, the last thing he touched before Vale's leader murdered him. Her fingers traced an intricate pattern in the dust beside her. He was Qatar, head of our clan. The sword is not just a weapon, it's a key. A key to what? Her eyes met his, vulnerability and strength battling for dominance. To our ancestral vault, to weapons that could tip the balance of power in this sector. To my birthright. She swallowed hard. When my father died, my uncle seized control. He allied with Vale, the same clan that murdered his brother. He claimed I was too young, too impulsive to lead. He exiled me. She reached out, her blue fingers hovering just above the sword at his hip, not quite touching it. My father told me stories when I was a child, about how the blade chooses its bearer. He called it the call of the blade. He believed that someday the sword would find one worthy not by blood, but by spirit. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I thought they were just tales to make me brave, until I saw it glowing in your hands. Her eyes lifted to meet his, no longer icy but filled with a fire he hadn't seen before. But I never expected it would choose someone like you. The pieces clicked into place in Riker's mind. And now you want to return with Daddy's sword and claim the throne? She flinched at his crude summary. I want justice. I want to honor my father's memory. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I am the last true Qatar. Riker leaned back against a crate, studying her. The warrior woman who had arrogantly claimed him as property now looked younger, wounded in ways that went beyond the physical injury to her leg. He'd known many people driven by vengeance in his life, had been one himself once. It rarely ended well for anyone involved. Honor and memory, he said with a cynical half-smile. Those are things fools die for. What do you die for, human? Credits? Your next meal? The privilege of drawing another breath? Riker didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly rolled up his sleeve, revealing an intricate tattoo that ran the length of his forearm. Names, dozens of them, wrapped around a military insignia she wouldn't recognize. Beneath it ran a jagged scar that looked as though it had been made by serrated metal. I used to die for honor, he said quietly, for a flag, for orders from people I never met. His voice hardened. All I got was this scar and the names of friends I buried. So yeah, these days I prefer to die for simpler things. His eyes met hers with unexpected intensity, like getting a stubborn warrior princess out of trouble. Riker leaned back against a crate, studying her. The warrior woman who had arrogantly claimed him as property now looked younger, wounded in ways that went beyond the physical injury to her leg. He'd known many people driven by vengeance in his life, had been one himself once. It rarely ended well for anyone involved. Honor and memory, he said with a cynical half-smile. Those are things fools die for. She stiffened, the vulnerable moment passing. What do you die for, human? Credits? Your next meal? The privilege of drawing another breath? I try not to die at all, he replied, but something in her question disturbed him more than he wanted to admit. He stood abruptly, checking the bandage one last time. Can you move? We shouldn't stay in one place too long. Kaya tested her leg, wincing. I can manage. Slowly. Then let's go. Your ship. Where is it docked? Bay 17, Eastern Quadrant. She hesitated. If it's still there. Riker helped her to her feet, allowing her to lean on him for support. Only one way to find out. As they moved toward the exit, he found himself acutely aware of the sword at his hip. It seemed heavier now, weighted with the legacy of a murdered clan leader and the desperate hope of his daughter. Riker had come to Tartar Station looking for salvage, something to sell for enough credits to keep flying. Instead, he'd found himself entangled in a blood feud between ancient clans, with a wounded warrior princess using him as a crutch. Just another day in the life of a scavenger. They emerged onto the station's exterior roof level, gulping the relatively fresher air. The cold light of Tartar's neon signs painted their faces in garish colors. Below them, sirens wailed as emergency responders rushed toward the blaze. The fire would be contained eventually. Nothing spread too far on a space station without triggering catastrophic failsafes. But for now, they were safe. Riker supported Kaya as they made their way across the rooftop, her injury slowing their progress considerably. Their journey through the maintenance corridors had been tense and painstaking, punctuated by moments where they'd been forced to hide from search parties or take detours around sealed security checkpoints. "There," Kaya said, pointing toward a distant docking arm that extended from the eastern quadrant of the station. "Bay 17. Riker studied the path ahead, noting the exposed walkways and security checkpoints they would need to navigate. With Kaya injured, they couldn't exactly blend into the crowd. "We'll need a distraction," he mused, scanning the station's exterior. His eyes landed on a cluster of fuel cells near a maintenance depot. Something to draw attention away from the docking bay. Kaya followed his gaze and nodded in understanding. "My ship's access codes are still valid. If we can reach it, we can be gone before they realize what happened." They set the makeshift explosive with practiced efficiency, using components Riker had scavenged during their journey through the maintenance areas. A timer gave them 15 minutes to reach the docking bay. A tight window given Kaya's condition, but their best chance at escape. The explosion, when it came, was more spectacular than they'd anticipated. A chain reaction engulfed the maintenance depot in a fireball that momentarily illuminated the entire eastern quadrant. Station security and emergency responders immediately converged on the site, leaving their path to the docking bay relatively clear. They had almost reached Base 17 when a solitary figure stepped out from behind a loading crane. Tall and imposing in battle-scarred armor, he stood directly in their path, the leader of the Veil mercenaries. His helmet was gone, revealing a face mapped with ritual scars and cybernetic implants. A nasty burn disfigured one side of his face, a souvenir from their earlier encounter. "The sword," he said simply, his voice surprisingly soft. "Give it to me now and perhaps I'll let one of you live." Riker eased Kaya to the side, positioning himself between her and the mercenary. "You're persistent. I'll give you that." The mercenary's eyes, one natural, one a glowing red implant, flicked to Kaya. "Your father died begging for mercy. Did you know that, little princess?" He wept as his blood pooled around him. Kaya lunged forward with a cry of rage, nearly falling as her injured leg buckled. Riker caught her, restraining her with firm but gentle hands. "He's baiting you," he murmured. "Stay back." The mercenary laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Listen to your pet human, girl. He knows you're in no condition to fight." His hand moved to the weapon at his hip, a vicious-looking energy blade that hummed to life with an ominous crackle. Riker stepped forward, drawing the ancient sword. It felt strange in his hand, heavier than it should be, yet somehow balanced perfectly for his grip. "I don't suppose we could discuss this over drinks?" he asked with mock civility. The mercenary's response was to charge, his energy blade carving a deadly arc through the air. Riker met the attack with a defensive parry, the ancient metal of the Qatar sword somehow withstanding the energy blade's cutting force. The impact jarred his arm to the shoulder, but he held firm. What followed was a brutal dance of attack and counterattack. The mercenary fought with the precise technique of someone trained from birth in the art of killing. Riker fought with the desperate creativity of a survivor, using the environment, exploiting openings, conserving energy while his opponent expended it on powerful but increasingly wild attacks. "You fight like a cornered animal," the mercenary sneered as they circled each other. "No technique, no honor." "Yeah," Riker replied, spitting blood. "And I'm still alive." He feinted toward a power conduit, drawing the mercenary's attention, then kicked a loose piece of equipment into his opponent's knee. Blood streaked Riker's face from a glancing blow. His breathing came in ragged gasps, but he noticed that the mercenary was favoring his right side. The burn injury from the shot was affecting his mobility. There was a pattern to his attacks now, a predictability born of pain and anger. The mercenary's next strike was telegraphed a fraction of a second before it came. It was all Riker needed. Riker feinted left, then spun right, using the mercenary's momentum against him. The ancient blade found the gap between armor plates at the shoulder joint. It slid through with unexpected ease, as if eager to taste blood. The mercenary's cry of pain echoed across the docking area. Wounded but not defeated, the mercenary staggered back. His energy blade flashed in a desperate, sweeping attack. Riker, caught off balance, couldn't evade completely. The weapon scored a burning line across his ribs, then plunged deeper into his side before he could twist away. The pain was immediate and blinding, a white-hot brand searing through flesh and muscle. Riker felt warm blood soaking his shirt. Far too much blood. The energy blade had cauterized some of the wound, but had also sliced through something vital. His vision swam, the docking bay tilting alarmingly around him. Wounded but not defeated, the mercenary staggered back. His energy blade flashed in a desperate, sweeping attack. Riker, caught off balance, couldn't evade completely. The weapon scored a burning line across his ribs, the smell of charred flesh filling his nostrils. Through pain-blurred vision, Riker saw Kaya dragging herself toward them, a fallen piece of equipment clutched in her hands. With a supreme effort, she swung it at the mercenary's injured side. The impact wasn't powerful, but it was enough to distract him for a critical second. Riker seized the moment. The ancient sword moved almost of its own accord, finding the mercenary's throat with unerring precision. A look of disbelief crossed the man's face as his lifeblood pulsed around the embedded blade. Impossible, he gasped, red bubbles forming at his lips. A human, with a clan blade. Riker withdrew the sword with a single, clean motion. The mercenary collapsed to his knees and then toppled forward onto the metal deck. Silence descended, broken only by their labored breathing and the distant wail of sirens. "We need to go," Riker said, wiping the blade clean before sheathing it. He helped Kaya to her feet, supporting her weight as they made their way to the ship's airlock. "Can you fly in your condition?" "I could fly this ship blindfolded and delirious with fever," she replied, some of her old arrogance returning despite her pallor. "Just get me to the pilot's seat." Her ship was sleek and predatory, clearly designed for speed and stealth rather than comfort. The cockpit was compact but efficient, with controls configured for her species' physiology. Riker helped her into the pilot's chair, then took the co-pilot's seat, his eyes roving over the unfamiliar instrument panel. Kaya's fingers danced across the controls with practiced ease. The ship hummed to life around them, systems engaging in a carefully orchestrated sequence. Through the viewport, they could see station security converging on their position, weapons drawn. "Hold on," she said, a feral grin splitting her face despite her pain. The ship lurched, breaking free of its docking clamps with a screech of protesting metal. Artificial gravity fluctuated momentarily as they accelerated away from the station, the stars blurring into streaks of light as they jumped to safety. Only when they were safely in hyperspace did Riker allow himself to relax, the adrenaline draining from his system and leaving bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. He became acutely aware of the burning pain in his side where the energy blade had caught him. Looking down, he saw blood seeping through his makeshift bandage, pooling on the co-pilot's seat. "There's a medkit in the storage locker," Kaya said, noticing his discomfort. Her own face was drawn with pain, but her eyes were clear. "You should treat that before infection sets in." Riker nodded but made no immediate move to get up. The blood loss was making him lightheaded, his thoughts fuzzy around the edges. He knew the wound was serious, possibly fatal without proper medical attention. With trembling hands, he unclipped the ancient sword from his belt and laid it across his lap, studying its dull surface in the blue-tinged light of the cockpit. "Take it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "By your law, I fulfilled my duty. I protected you." He struggled to keep his voice steady as darkness crept in at the edges of his vision. "Finish what your father started. If I don't make it..." He held the sword out to her, hilt first. Not with the brusque impatience of someone wanting to end an unwanted obligation, but with the respect of one warrior to another. "I've spent my life avoiding attachments," he said, his voice rough with pain and something deeper. "Clans, crews, causes, they all want something from you until there's nothing left to give." His eyes met hers with unexpected intensity. "But today I chose your side when all logic said to run. I still don't know why." Kaya stared at him for a long moment, something unreadable in her ice blue eyes. Perhaps the blade knew before either of us did. With a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly, she reached for the sword. The moment her fingers closed around the hilt, something extraordinary happened. The ancient metal beneath her palm pulsed with sudden life, emitting a soft, ethereal glow that cast strange shadows across their faces. The runes etched along the blade, symbols Riker had assumed were merely decorative, began to shine with inner light, shifting and rearranging themselves like living things. Riker watched the transformation reflected in Kaya's face. Shock, followed by disbelief, and then something that looked remarkably like horror. Tears welled in her eyes, catching the eerie light of the runes. As the sword's glow intensified, Riker felt a strange warmth spreading from his wounded side. Looking down, he saw tendrils of blue-white light seeping through his fingers where they pressed against the injury. The pain began to recede, not completely, but enough that the fog of impending unconsciousness lifted from his mind. The bleeding slowed to a trickle. What does it say?" he asked, his voice stronger now, though still rough with pain. Kaya raised her eyes to meet his. The coldness and contempt that had defined her gaze were gone, replaced by pure, unfiltered amazement. A single tear traced a silvery path down her blue cheek. "He didn't know," she whispered, seemingly to herself rather than to Riker. "The ancient ritual, it's not just binding. It requires sacrifice. To become my husband, you had to be willing to become my slave first. You had to prove yourself willing to die for me without promise of reward." Her hand trembled as it hovered over his wound. "The connection, the blade is protecting you because you're now a part of me." Slowly, she extended the blade so he could see for himself. The inscription had transformed, the glowing symbols now forming words in a language he somehow understood, despite never having studied it. All enemies of the new warrior woman are now his enemies. Let him be her blade, her shield, her husband. Riker stared at the glowing runes, feeling the ground metaphorically shift beneath his feet. He had just exchanged the shackles of a slave for the bonds of marriage. And judging by the stunned expression on his new, unexpected wife's face, it would be a very, very complicated marriage. This isn't possible," Kaya whispered, her composure cracking for the first time since he'd met her. "The blade was my father's. It cannot simply change allegiance." "Seems like it just did," Riker replied, trying to process this new development. "I'm guessing this wasn't in your plan when you tracked me down." Her eyes flashed. "This is no laughing matter, human. Do you have any idea what this means? The Blade of Qatar has chosen you as my bondmate. This hasn't happened in 7 generations." "I don't remember being asked if I wanted to be chosen," Riker said dryly. "Neither was I," she shot back. They sat in tense silence, the implications of what had just occurred expanding between them like a nebula. The ship continued its silent journey through hyperspace, carrying them away from danger but toward an uncertain future. The silence was broken by the sudden activation of the ship's communication system. A holographic projection flickered to life in the space between them. The image of a male of Kaya's species, older, with elaborate facial tattoos and ceremonial armor. His silver hair was bound in intricate braids, and his eyes held the same ice blue color as Kaya's, but without their warmth or compassion. His gaze fixed immediately on the glowing sword between them, and his expression shifted from contempt to avid hunger. "Foolish girl," the figure said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Did you think I would allow you to reclaim power? The blade is activated and now it leads me directly to you, and to what it unlocks." His lips curved in a cruel smile. "Thank you for doing all the dirty work." Kaya's face drained of color. "Uncle," she whispered. "The rightful leader of Clan Qatar," he corrected her. "Your father was weak. He would have surrendered our birthright for peace." His gaze shifted to Riker, and his expression turned to one of disgust. "And now his blade has bonded with a human. How fitting that the line ends in such disgrace." He leaned forward, his holographic form seeming to grow larger. "The ancient vault requires Qatar blood to open. Your father thought hiding the blade would keep our secrets safe." A predatory smile spread across his face. "But now I need only find you to access it all. And when I do, your blood will serve its purpose." His eyes narrowed as he studied the glowing runes on the blade. "Ah, so the ritual is complete. Even better." His voice became almost reverential. "Do you know, human, What power can be extracted from two souls bound by ancient magic? The weapons in the vault are mere trinkets compared to the energy of such a bond. Once I tear it from your dying bodies. The hologram flickered and disappeared, leaving them in stunned silence. Kaya's hands trembled as she gripped the controls. He's tracking us, she said, her voice hollow. He'll never stop hunting us now. Riker placed his hand over hers, steadying her grip on the ship's controls. Then we'd better come up with a plan. His fingers intertwined with hers. I've spent my life running from fights that weren't mine. Maybe it's time to stop running. Her eyes met his, surprise giving way to fierce determination. The vault, it doesn't just contain weapons. It holds the truth about my father's murder. Evidence that could unite the other clans against my uncle? Then that's where we're going, Riker said with a decisive nod. Not running away, but straight toward the danger. This isn't your fight, she said, but without conviction. Riker looked down at their intertwined hands, then back to her face. According to that glowing sword, it is now. They were bound now. By a sword, by circumstance, by forces neither of them fully understood. Enemies surrounded them, and the road ahead was fraught with danger. But for the first time since the blade had called to him from beneath the wreckage, Riker felt like he might be exactly where he was meant to be.